In some of these meetings, we've talked about how the psychedelic viewpoint is always trying to meld things together, to make a coincidentia positorum out of apparently dichotomous position. But there is this one issue where it's very hard to get it going both ways, and that is to try and figure out what our relationship to the earth is, and then what we can do about it. Is our destiny to become the stewards of the earth? Are we to become like ecology tenders, gardeners on a planetary scale, honoring species diversity, detoxifying environments, and promoting and somehow glorifying the steady state of ecology? Or is that now impossible? And do we have to accept that you don't make an omelet without breaking eggs, and that the egg which we're about to break is an entire living planet? And that somehow, in the name of the angel which wants to be born from the human soul, we are going to about to witness the destruction of an entire planet for the birthing of some kind of hyper-technological space-faring species. Great difficulties lie ahead. The species equivalent of what I've been calling ego is the inability to curb our drive to reproduce ourselves. As a species, this is our chauvinistic, the center of our chauvinistic complex. We have put economic systems in place that have implicit in them the assumption of more and more and more and more people. And it's more and more and more people that are destroying the planet, because capitalism has this built-in assumption of, ever-expanding populations. This notion that there is some value in just endlessly producing people is impossible for me to understand. I mean, you would have to bring the Catholic Church around on this issue. But I think that, it's like the greening of Buddhism or something like that. Celibacy has always been marketed as a fine and mighty thing. I could never understand why. It just seemed to me a source of neurotic contortion. But we could define celibacy differently. We could define celibacy as a commitment not to have children. That's a meaningful celibacy from society's point of view. You've actually done something for society, and you haven't pushed yourself out of shape. We don't need you to become a eunuch. We just need, a little restraint. Well, then, the problem then with this rap, I think, is that it seems to go against one of our most cherished icons, which is the nuclear family. But I'm beginning to think that the nuclear family is actually a dinosaur, and that it is far from being this wonderful institution, thousands of years old, which is our last link with anything meaningful and human. That's not what the nuclear family is. The nuclear family was dreamed up in 1600, right before the 30 Years' War, and before that, everybody lived in extended families in multiple generational dwellings, and women had great support in child rearing from their sisters and the wives of their brothers, and so forth and so on. The modern nuclear family, and I've got one, I know whereof I speak, is just a cauldron for neurosis. It makes impossible demands on everybody involved. And, the last census showed that something like 3/4 of American households are no longer organized that way. They have some other arrangement. I think that this one woman, one child thing is, first of all, it rests upon women to implement it. Second of all, it seems to me it's tremendously empowering of women, because the second child, to my observing mind, the second child is the way that male dominance is driven home in the modern marriage, and that a woman can be independent with one child. With two children, if she's not superhuman, she's going to have to cut a deal with the prevailing system of male dominance that is in place. Well, I just toss these ideas out there because I think it's interesting we never hear these things. It could be very easily done, and if we are not going to go to space, then I think we have to immediately plan a sane future. We cannot continue as we have. Now, you might object, and I'm sure many people would, that this one woman, one child thing is a tremendous interference in basic civil liberties. But you have to remember, we're not comparing it to heaven. We're comparing it to the future we're going to have if we don't get some of these problems under control. And the thing I like about this idea is people volunteer. It's self-organizing. We don't have the Central Committee on Population and Eugenics Control saying who may have children and who may not. You appeal to people's higher self. I think that in our society presently, there's a lot of tension around the issue of having or not having children. And many people manage, if they don't have children, to define themselves as somehow incomplete. I think this is a terrible mistake, that the reflexes that served during the last glaciation, to propagate furiously as much as possible, may not be the reflexes that really serve the community as we approach 6 billion people on the planet. So I would like, instead of all this ballyhooing of the nuclear family that we get from politicians, I would like the independent choices of women to limit childbearing to be supported, and I think men could support that, society could support that, and that single area of activity would give us breathing space to solve all our other problems, because every other area where we make a start toward a solution, it's swept away by population growth. This is just unconscionable. It's intolerable. Speaking of unconscionable, as a former Catholic, I think it behooves me to just stomp all over them. They have a population policy which I equate with the final solution for the Jews in Nazi Germany. I mean, how in the world you can support continued uncontrolled birth in the third world when it shoves millions of people into poverty and death? Entire societies go on to the triage list, and people are squawking that it's immoral to intervene in this situation. I just don't understand. This is, to me, this is another bugaboo of mine, but this is, to me, a perfect example of what I call the poisonous nature of ideology. That, will sink in a sea of slime if it's up to the Pope, rather than just change your mind, You speak ex cathedra. They said it one way, say it another way. Times change. God said times change, so here's the change. It's absurd. And this war was justified under the grounds that evil was out of control in a part of the world. It was just running roughshod over whole nations and peoples. But this population policy thing is pushing many more people into death and degradation than the policies of the Ba'athist Party in Iraq, believe me. But now we are a global society, united by electronic media, thinking as one mind. And it's very important, I think, in this last decade before the millennium, to try and shed some of the ideology of the past and try and plot a way toward a sane world. I mean, we've talked about a number of things here. A technical fix, visible language, which can be accomplished either through drugs and computers or a combination of the two. A social fix, one woman, one child, and these things are not mutually exclusive. There are other things that can be done, but I think this population thing is just very basic, and the debate that can be spawned around it, the education that can go on around talking about this population thing, will lead in to all of these other issues, because what we're actually doing is we're coming to the end of our childhood, and we are being given, metaphorically, the keys to the family car. And the family car is the planet. And so now they're saying, okay, go forth and drive and try to stay out of trouble. And I don't think any area of discussion should be off limits. I think if pharmacological invention against human bestiality and cloddishness is possible, then that should be entertained. If we can consciously limit our population, that should be entertained. And, you know, there's a slew of exotic possibilities. I mean, if everybody were the size of a piss ant, we could all live in Utah. Or, you know, some people think we're going to be downloaded into a black cube on the backside of the moon. I don't know. I suspect it's going to be more mundane than that, and that instead of just waiting for the flying saucers to save us, it's actually going to take an act of human self-discipline and self-control. It looks like tragedy. There's a lot of blood and moaning and thrashing and agony. You would never dream that this was not only part of the plan, but the culmination of the plan. And, you know, we are birthing something here. The question is, are we birthing something that will honor the planet, or is the planet the placenta of this birth, and when it's over with, the planet will be finished with, and it'll just be disposable somehow? I mean, that's a mind-boggling concept, but we don't know what's going on here. We do not know what is happening here. The rest of nature presents no problem. I mean, through the theory of molecular genetics and Darwinism and so forth, we understand nature on its surface pretty well. But when we come to ourselves, you know, we're a miracle and a mystery. The language, the art, the spiritual yearnings, all this is very puzzling in the context of mindless nature.
I don't take issue with the idea. It's obviously a great idea, but I can't imagine it having more adherence than the flat earth theory.
Is this the idea about limiting population?
Yeah, I can't imagine it ever catching on unless there was some other psychological mutation. I mean, only a handful of people would ever. And plus, it seems like it's a woman's solution, but men are making the laws about birth control and abortion.
Well, you're saying that it would never catch on disturbs me, because essentially you're saying I wasn't persuasive. So I'm dead in the water. If I can't persuade you, how am I going to persuade the matrons of Beverly Hills?
They wouldn't even come here in the first place. You may persuade all of us, but we're already a tiny minority.
Well, this brings up the subject of meme replication. Do you all know what a meme is? A meme is the smallest unit out of which ideas are made. In the same way that a gene is proteins are made by genes. Well, ideas are made by memes. And what I see myself doing here, I mean, very consciously, I'll reveal the game plan to you, is I'm a meme generator, and you are meme receivers. And then your job is to generate the meme again, and faithful copying is very important here, just like in genetics, because if you get it wrong, it's not the same meme. Please pay attention. So I really believe, I mean, maybe this is the last shred of my idealism, but I really do believe the best idea will win. That the best idea will replicate and consume and digest and replicate its competition, and it will win. And that this is why I'm very optimistic, because I love the environment of electronic media. As long as we can be allowed to meet like this and talk, we can win. Because, it was William Blake who said a wonderful thing. He said, "The truth cannot be told so as to be understood without being believed." Do you understand? In other words, if you can tell the truth to somebody and they understand you, belief is automatic. You don't even have to worry about that. What's important is that they understand you. And so, what we're trying to do here is build understanding. I think, what objection would people have to this? I mean, what is the great rhetorical comeback to this idea?
I've got it.
Oh, you've got it? What is it?
Well, just not that one, this idea that crosses a lot of religious beliefs and political beliefs, but there's also just another thought about, when you brought forth that idea, the solution of one woman, one child, is there's the classic Gandhi statement of there's enough for the world's need, but not enough for the world's greed, which gets back to where you originally started out with, in this situation because of ego, nuclear family systems that have been set up politically, economically, etc. So maybe we can move all those people from the back streets of India and move them all to Montana. We don't have to be this big. There seems to be, the Earth seems to be self-generating to an extent of different, other thoughts need to be.
So you would argue that steady state is sufficient, that we should not try to reduce population, but that we should just stay at a certain number, and that the Earth is sufficient to support that number. The problem is, a great leveling will have to take place to give a decent standard of living to most people, and that leveling is going to come right out of this society because we're at the top of the pyramid.
No, I think a different consciousness towards the usage.
Towards matter. Well, but this gets close to being a virtual reality solution. You either are saying people should become Zen monks, or we're going to give them an electronic simulacrum of the world that will be very cheap to produce, but as satisfying as reality. I'm sure that an effort will be done to do this. In fact, both things are happening simultaneously. Zen Buddhism is thriving, and virtual reality research is thriving too. I agree that it cuts across all kinds of religious and social taboos, but I think that if you look at each one of those taboos, you'll find them rooted in male dominance. And that what this is it's at a lightning stroke, you just end male dominance. Women with one child and a government supporting that as a policy with subsidies, in a stroke would liberate women from much of the machinery of their oppressive position in society. So, and then people say, well, but what about people who want more than one child? Well, good Lord, the world is adrift in orphans, awash in orphans. And then if you say, well, but I want my child, well, then we're right. That's what we're saying no to, is this genetic ego chauvinism. I mean, you can have your one child, but just the notion that your genes are to be spread like chaff to the wind is...
It's not the idea, it's how will people even listen to it? It's so against all their conditioning, not just...
No, I think it's actually, isn't it happening? Aren't there...
It's happening in China. China is mandatory. You get penalized if you have more than one child.
But that's not what we want. We don't want that. But I get the feeling that there are thousands of women with one child around who have made a decision to live without a permanent man in their life, or perhaps with a permanent man in their life, but they have made the decision that in order to have a career, a degree of independence, a degree of financial comfort that they wouldn't have otherwise. I think this is happening on an undetected and large scale. It's just that we have not given it any support. But we should say these women are the heroes of the future. These are the people who are creating the new paradigm. It's not being created in seminars at Esalen. It's creating as people actually create new kinds of lives in order to deal with the world as they find it.
In Japan, just recently, there's a big controversy that's been raging for the last few months about this issue, and they're trying to get the women there to only have one child. They're offering them cash incentives. I mean, granted, the cash incentives in the light of their economy are quite minimal, but again, it's not self-expression, but...
Well, now, it's interesting. I'd like to know more about this, because first of all, Japan is one of the most child-worshipping societies in the world. Second of all, it's one of the most consumer-intense societies in the world. So if the Japanese government is encouraging a one-woman, one-child policy, there should be immediate relief and release of resources somewhere else in the world, because probably the Japanese child also is using 800 times as much resources. Well, I'm all for this. I think it should be debated. If I've made a serious error, if somebody can run the demographic modeling, I'd like to know how fast will it fall. Unlike you, who thinks it couldn't be sold, I'm already grappling with the problem of how would you persuade people to stop it as they observed decade over decade over decade themselves get richer, better taken care of, their vast estates become ever more vast, the cost of art falling, the cost of everything falling. How would you say, okay, folks, we've been at this 125 years, now everybody go back to having as many children as they want? I think it would be that this would be the real problem, is to shut it off once you demonstrated what a good thing it is. Yeah.
Well, we've already seen some level of this in the baby boom generation deferring having children. So we've had right now at the 20-year-old age, we have a decline in the population. That's kicking to a new boom behind that, but the implications are the incredible value that would be placed on the children it had.
Oh, incredible value. These children would have an education, and they would inherit a sane, detoxified, non-violent... I mean, it's what we want. And I'm amazed that the mushroom could get it together in one sentence. I mean, you go, here's a question. How do you save the world? It says, one woman, one child. And then you go back and you run the city and say, my God, this is it. All we have to do is sell it. But now, why should it be hard to sell? I think a lot of people have children because they think they should. And it makes them poorer. it scatters their energy, and not everyone finds it, a tremendously rewarding experience. You can tell that by the statistics on child abuse, abandonment, and that sort of thing. I think we should see it not as a biological function that we're all likely to participate in our lives, but the highest calling to which a human being can aspire, and the generation of new people for the next twist of the spiral. Yeah, Billy.
Well, I think you want to include with that a restructuring of the family in order that children could have co-children, because that's a big thing for having more than one children. A big motivation is to provide growth mate, playmate.
The archaic model is the longhouse or the extended family. And I think that, what the automobile did to the nuclear family, which was, first of all, it made it possible, but it's a completely maladaptive style. Men become breadwinners. They have offices far from the home. They are ground down by a set of concerns that their wife and children never see. The woman is essentially a hearth slave, chained to the tasks of the house and to the idiot cycle of consuming. The children have too tight an interaction with each other, not a tight enough interaction with there are not multiple role models in the form of uncles, cousins, aunts, and so forth, coming and going. I mean, in an Amazonian family, in an Amazonian tribe, if you have a hassle with your family, you just take down your hammock and move 3 posts down to your uncle's family. And it's a big deal. You've moved out. But it's only from me to Cheryl, But it's a statement about space and commitment. And then if you piss on your uncle, he'll throw you out, and then you have to go somewhere else. And children move, and they choose their role models, and it's all, we really have to get back to feeling human, to feeling good about ourselves.
I am in total agreement with you, but what I am feeling increasingly pessimistic about is that we, and I use the term collectively, are ever going to be able to get that kind of unity and agreement behind anything. I don't see anything to indicate that we're moving in that direction, and it absolutely breaks my heart. But yes, if we got behind just that one idea, of course it would transform the world. But there are a lot of other ideas too, but it just seems to me that again, the ego is driving the machine, and unless there's that radical shift in consciousness on this large level, I just don't see it happening, and I feel exceedingly discouraged by that.
Well, what I liked, as I said, about this idea was, number one, it didn't depend on men. That eliminates half of everybody. So that we've eliminated, now it's critically dependent on half of the human race. And then what I really like about it is that the women that it is least important to convert are the women that it would be hardest to convert. In other words, it's going to be hard, it's least important to convert the women of India, the women of Bangladesh, because their children aren't impacting on resources anyway. So it should be easiest to reach the college-educated, high-tech, independently minded, liberal, financially comfortable American or European woman. Well, if that's who we have to convince, then I feel hope. I feel that that's a constituency from which I would expect fair treatment, a decent hearing, and so forth. Yeah, I'm just working this out over the past 10 days, so I'm very interested in feedback. It's not really my bailiwick, but this how do we save the world thing comes up all the time, and many people in these workshops ask me the question, what can I personally do? And I just had some namby-pamby answer. You should be aware, oh God, I don't know. Well, here's something you can do. Limit your reproductive expression to one child. This is the most politically high-impact act you will ever have. I mean, the people on the other side of the planet that you will never meet will thank you if they but could.
What do the men do?
Men should support women in this choice.
Is it celibacy or sterilization? What choice is it that women are making? Do men have a say in it?
You mean after the first child, what happens?
Yeah.
Well, I think that there are many options, so they should all be exercised. We're not talking about mass sterilization here. I have 2 children. As soon as I had my second child, I had a vasectomy. It just seemed to me like the socially responsible thing to do. I will not stand up in front of a group of people and advocate vasectomy because I think I was lied to about what it's like. I mean, they said, oh, it's a little procedure. Snip, snip, he said. Hey, I won't give you the gory details, but it's certainly politically a defensible thing. I think this is where, if you're serious about making a political impact, this is where we can all have a tremendous impact, and it's on us, because our children are such rapacious users of the world and its resources, and somehow we have to recognize that.
Cut down the numbers, then we can still use the same.
I see what you're saying. No.
Solar is screwed.
No, all I'm suggesting here is that this would buy us breathing time. I'm not saying
some more calculator
to figure out how we're going to solve the very problems you're talking about. I'm not suggesting we go back to the 17th century and live on vast estates and burn coal and wood because there are only 500 million of us on Earth. No, I think that if we if we take off this population pressure, then there will be breathing time to implement the other solutions that you're talking about: a solar economy, a hydrogen economy run on hydrogen split from seawater. There are a number of these kinds of things. And also we have to correct the gaseous imbalance of the atmosphere. This billion people that I'm talking about will be kept fully employed as combination archaeologists and waste cleanup artists, because there will be centuries of detoxifying and cleaning up the earth to be done.
Well, I think what you're skirting around here is the possibility that the genetic plan has a whole other scenario going, and that we're actually agents of a grander plan that's being acted through us. And that's where the theme of leaving the planet comes around again and again. Like Tim Leary talks about often. The plan of the gene is to fill up niches with new species, and then the pressure generated by overcrowding spawns the creative, intelligent leap to the next, whatever the next frontier is. And that as a human species, we've been filling up the ecological niche of basically the planet's surface, really, because we're so adaptable.
Well, see, the problem with that, from my point of view, is that, and the problem with all these forced evolution scenarios, is they have no mercy on the individual. I mean, in this nice phrase, filling up the niche, what are we talking about? 10 billion people? 20 billion people? How hellish does it have to get on this planet before governments dedicate every penny they've got to building spaceships to escape? I mean, it could get that bad, but I would prefer not to be crisis-driven, not to always be moving to the next phase because the bridge behind us is on fire.
Would you credence to the fact that there's an underlying possibly an underlying scenario that we have to come make an agreement with, or
I think ultimately we'll be a spacefaring species, but I think we have to prove our worthiness for that, and the way you prove your worthiness is by not wrecking your home planet. You can't join the Galactic Club if you wreck your home planet. They withdraw your membership application. In order to save our planet, we're going to have to become excellent planners, able to coordinate diverse points of view, able to honor diverse points of view, all the things we haven't yet learned to do. And then, when we've balanced our accounts on this planet, we'll be able to go out into the universe. I really wouldn't want us to go any other way. I mean, I don't like the scum to the stars scenario that, we will pillage, rape, and burn our way to our tourists the same way we did to Fort Laramie or something. I don't like that. I think that we have to pass certain tests before we can enter the Galactic Club. Yeah, there is also, there is a realm of art. I mean, we will, through virtual reality and things like that, we want to both save the Earth and live in this titanic dimension where our engineering dreams can be unfolded against black space. And it's the tension between these two things, the garden planet we come from and the truly titanic dreams that are being dreamed even now, I mean, of ships the size of Manitoba that would carry 1 billion people to the stars, stuff like that. I mean, it isn't here now, but on the other hand, nothing that is here now was here even 100 years ago. Well, see, you get a fair amount of agreement when you talk about saving the world and you talk about what we should stop. We should stop population, stop pollution, stop nuclear proliferation. Where it gets tricky is when you move into the area of what could be done, not turning switches off, but turning switches on, and then it becomes really complicated to know exactly what to do. For instance, there's a CO2 debt in the atmosphere that is the accumulation of several centuries of fairly intense industrial activity. Well, recently it's been proposed that for cheap, for like $25 million, the cost of a bad movie, you could divert iron ore tankers from the Great Lakes to the South Pacific and pelletize hematite ore and dump it into the sea in the South Atlantic to create a temporary algal bloom that would, the theory is this huge algal bloom would take place. There would be a massive release of oxygen into the atmosphere, and then the algal bloom would consume the hematite, and the algae would die, and there would be a net gain of 3% oxygen in the planetary atmosphere. This is big stuff we're talking, how right or wrong can you be? Is this the kind of fiddling we should be getting into? And then the answer is, well, it depends on how bad you think things are. Obviously, we're not going to stand by and do nothing while the planet burns up. But, and there are other plans like this. There are plans to aerosol spray powdered lime into the atmosphere to restore the acid imbalance in lakes. And they're talking about doing this on a scale of the northern hemisphere. Millions of tons of lime dust dropped at high altitude and then allowed to aerosol disperse. But they're afraid that there might be a return of sunlight to space that would cause a climatological depression. So when you're able to make big corrective changes, you're able to make big boo-boos. And these are vast multinational undertakings which impact every country and population on the planet. So, what kind of administrative machinery is to be put in place to deal with this kind of thing? Well, these are all challenges to human organization and to mind, and because we're going to have to design from the ground up, redesign an entire global system, I think psychedelics as a catalyst to the design process should have an obvious role. I mean, we have an opportunity to remake the world almost from scratch if we will but use the tools that we have to do it, the tools that allow us to reach people, to educate people, the computer power that we have to simulate various solutions before we commit to them. The future is a future of planning. The mushroom said to me once, very emphatically, it said, if you don't have a plan, you become part of somebody else's plan. Or the implication is some other plan.
And we see that happening. She's taking it.
It is easier to move around than you think. I mean, this is both a cause for cynicism and hope. As an example of this, I had a funny thing happen when I was coming down here. I don't own a TV. I own TVs, but I don't own antennas. I watch tape, but I never watch broadcast TV, so I don't know anything about it. So I'm reading the entertainment page of the paper, and it says that Twin Peaks is canceled. And I'm puzzled. Isn't this the most phenomenally successful television program in history? Isn't this the show which mobilized hundreds of millions of people so they had to be home in time to see it night after night? And I read through this thing. It's in the business section, actually, not in... And I read through this, and it says it's canceled, it's finished. The public relations ploy of focusing audience attention on the question of who killed Laura Palmer completely backfired. The whole thing is a burnt-out case. It wasn't the most creative television show in history. It was junk. A lot of money was spent to make people think it's wonderful, and now the money has stopped being spent, and it ain't wonderful anymore. This is an example of the power of public relations.
Yes.
That's all. If you will give me $10 million, we can sell this idea to enough people to make an impact on the history of the planet. You could sell any idea for $10 million. Media costs money. Ideas are driven by the same market economy that drives everything else. I mean, it's an obscene fact. But no idea is sold without hype, because the arena of the sale of ideas is an arena of hype. I mean, it's all packaging and that sort of thing. This is a very cynical thing. I realized this watching the peace demonstrations after the war first broke out, because I come out of that. I was in the Vietnam Day Committee and all that stuff back in Berkeley. So then here's the CNN broadcast of the peace demonstration. And here's some guy, his Adam's apple moving 4 inches up and down as he speaks, screaming, "What do you want? Peace! When do you want it? No!" It's just, it's a total turn-off image. They must have been hired by the government to do this. Can't they get some decent public relations? Don't they understand public relations? It's how you... Well, then it's insidious. Then you have agents provocateurs, essentially, which was always the problem in the 60s. We looked so bad because the cops always led us. Well, the way money is spent in this country is really obscene. There was a breakdown of weapons in the paper about a week ago in an effort so that the ordinary person in the street could understand what's going on. The stealth fighter, is it the F-18? The F-18A, sitting there on the runway, costs $110 million. You know what you can buy if you have $110 million on the civilian market? You can buy the Trump princess. That's what the Trump princess costs. Well, now we think of Trump as just the exemplar of obscene wealth. I mean, this guy, what a pig, all this money. All of his money buys him one F-18A. We build these things by the dozens, dream of selling them by the hundreds. So, is Donald Trump a pig? What about, there are levels and levels. Some people make an easy target. The amount of money being spent on armament as opposed to the amount of money being spent on anything else, the cure of disease, housing, education, you name it, is totally schizophrenically skewed. But see, I think that ideas are permeable. They do leak out. All you have to do is articulate them. That's why I don't want to lead a particular crusade. I don't want to found the committee for one woman, one child, because I figure like my position is just to lay this stuff out there, and then if it's heard, that's how it tests. I mean, there is an environment of natural selection for ideas as well, and it's just a matter of putting these things out there. I had never heard, it's like a suppressed statistic, I had never heard the statistic about an American child using 600 to 800 times the resources of an Indian child. I mean, they do not tell you that, because that's all you need to know to figure out, to reach a whole bunch of conclusions just on your little own without anybody leading you by the nose. So that fact is kept in abeyance. And we're told, if only all these little brown people would stop breeding like flies, then they're not the problem.
Many delusions. And to break out of it is indeed a challenge. And it does take unity. And that's a challenge.
Well, and then if you're lazy, you just wait, and it also has internal contradiction, which will destroy it. If you're the patient type, you can just wait for the internal contradictions to destroy it. The problem is now we seem to be up against a kind of a planetary deadline. We don't have centuries to let these things work out. So a certain urgency creeps in. This is why anything which catalyzes consciousness, anything which accelerates the production of ideas in the body politic, has to be taken seriously. And when you look back at the 1960s, that's what characterized that decade, with a whole bunch of ideas came out with the psychedelics, and the psychedelics were repressed and pushed off stage, but the ideas remained to shape our society. I mean, feminism, racial tolerance, the idea of feeling concern for people far removed from you in space and time, the notion of brotherhood, basically, of global community, all that began then and has bedeviled them ever since. And that's the real legacy of that time. Now, it just has to be refocused. The problems are coming home to roost. It's not that abstract anymore. I mean, this convulsion over petroleum is going to haunt us for years. And I think that even in the government chancelleries and corporate boardrooms of this world, there's a fair amount of alarm. There's a fair sense that it's out of control. People are willing to talk turkey within their small private circles. Who is in charge? Where are we pointing and where do we want to go? And it's a complicated situation. Are the corporate multinationals black hats, white hats, gray hats, or all of the above? What are we doing with the nation state? Is it on its way out? It's a tremendous moment for opportunity, and there will be more chaos. This is just the beginning. The whole rest of this century is about the surfacing of the contradictions in the Renaissance structure of society that we've been working out. It won't function for an electronic population of 6 or 7 billion people. And we're meeting this challenge moment by moment.